Last chapter just floored me. From the nitty-gritty of bicycle design, those dual brake systems, genius, to the immediately obvious game-changer that is the tricycle for the common folk, the MC's practical innovation is on another level. The detailed problem-solving, like wicker baskets for cost-cutting or the debate between rod and cable brakes, makes the invention process so vivid. And it's not just about gadgets. The strategic undercurrent with the Shin tribe, culminating in Niu Wei's ransom through shrewd negotiation, was pure satisfaction. It shows the MC's multifaceted brilliance. But the real kicker? Just as the dust settles, crystals arrive, and we're catapulted into telescope development. I'm fascinated by how these primitive craftsmen are tackling advanced optics. With thousand-mile eyes potentially on the horizon and the Shin situation still volatile, how will this new tech shift? The power dynamics next? This sheet iron telescope tube was impressively thick and solid, like a small cannon barrel. Its four-section body tapered in diameter from front to back, and the eyepiece at the very end was also large, a good 3 centimeters wide. Holding this heavy behemoth with both hands, you took a look towards the distant city wall. Whoa! You could see ants moving house on the city wall bricks with perfect clarity. Turning it again, you aimed at the docks outside the city. Good heavens, even the wrinkles on the villagers' faces were perfectly clear. You raised the lens a bit higher, and the newly built gate tower of Suifu County on the opposite bank immediately loomed into view. Unfortunately, looking further down, the city wall was completely blocked by a small patch of woods. Your heart skipped a beat. Holy crap, what a killer instrument. If you were high enough with a wide enough field of view, seeing a dozen or so, kilometers would be child's play. You immediately turned your head and asked the technician beside you, "This one, what's its magnification?" "Chief, by our calculations, this one is estimated to be around 600 times magnification. The objective lens is 120 millimeters, the eyepiece 30 millimeters. The focal length is fixed. It can't zoom. It's a combination of a convex lens plus a convex lens," the technician answered smartly, with a hint of eager excitement as if seeking credit. Not bad, you said, rubbing your chin. "Can we make it even bigger?" Hearing the chief's interest, the technician's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. How big does the chief want to make it? As long as you give the word, chief, we'll have work to do." You started to ponder. 600 times magnification. Goodness gracious, this was almost on par with a small astronomical telescope. But your ambition didn't stop there. If it could be made even bigger, in the future, the Han capital must have a magnificent observatory, with a towering telescope inside. Only that would be worthy of our ambition to dominate the world, and it would also contribute to future scientific development. The Han's journey must be towards the stars and seas. That's what you call vision. What if we made the objective lens 10 times larger? Could you guys rig that up? 10 times? The technician was completely dumbfounded. He rapidly calculated on his fingers, then looked at you with an expression that clearly said, "Chief, sir, have you miscalculated?" "Chief, this 120 millimeter one already takes a heck of a lot of effort to hold by hand. That's why we didn't dare make it any bigger. If we enlarge it 10 times, wouldn't the objective lens diameter be 1.2 meters? The whole tube would have to be 7 or 8 meters long. How would you use such a behemoth? What would you look at with it? Chief, you haven't miscalculated, have you?" You chuckled and shook your head. True, why argue with someone who'd never seen an astronomical telescope, as if he were a primitive man? You patiently guided him, saying, "Haven't there been stories of people looking at the sun with these things and blinding themselves? Since some people know to use it to look at the stars in the sky, aren't you curious about the stars? I just want to make a bigger one, specifically for counting stars. Think about it. Don't those imperial astronomers in our tribe rely on observing the sun, moon, and stars every day to determine the calendar and schedule farming? If there was a tool that could let them see more clearly, for them, it would be an incredible stroke of luck, like manna from heaven. Also, you guys in design, since you know it's too big to hold by hand, why didn't you think of fitting it with a stand? A detachable one, just like this kind of tripod. Saying this, you turned back to your desk, took out 3 pencils, and with a couple of quick moves fashioned them into a simple tripod shape, demonstrating how the telescope would be mounted on it. When the researcher saw this, it was like a light bulb went on. His eyes brightened considerably. "Chief, that bigger one you mentioned, how would it be mounted? And the tube, if it's still made of sheet iron, I'm afraid it won't support such heavy lenses and will just collapse." You shot the fellow a sidelong glance, thinking to yourself, "This blockhead only knows how to take orders. Can't he think for himself?" But to avoid unnecessary detours, you decided to give him a few more pointers. First, since you know it's large and heavy, why not think about making it lighter? We still need to use sheet iron, but don't we have riveting and welding techniques? Now, you can absolutely use angle iron or iron bars to first weld a frame like a keel, and then attach thin sheet iron to it. That way it'll be both sturdy and lightweight, understand? As for the stand, you first need to consider its purpose. This is for looking at stars, so it must be able to rotate 360 degrees without any blind spots, so you can look at any star you want. Next is strength. The stand has to be rock solid, able to support the telescope's weight, and it must be securely mounted. Don't let it get knocked over and broken in a moment of excitement. Third, you also need to think thoroughly about subsequent maintenance. It would be best to have an access panel on the tube. If a lens breaks, it should be quick to replace. Such a large piece of equipment, just throw it away if it breaks? How wasteful would that be? It takes so much effort to make. Therefore, later use and maintenance must be planned in advance. Otherwise, if you only think about repairs when a problem occurs, you'll be completely at a loss. Yes, thank you for your teachings, Chief. I will definitely study hard and make progress every day. The researcher was so excited his face turned red, as if he'd obtained some secret martial arts manual. To be able to receive your personal instruction was an incredibly rare honor, a true blessing. However, once he calmed down, he was stumped by your idea of a fully rotating stand. To rotate in all directions and still be stable, how complicated would that be? Just thinking about it made his head ache. Looking at his constipated expression, your heart sank again. All right, better give him some more pointers. You fellow, don't just keep your eyes confined to the research institute. Go out more, ask around more, broaden your horizons. Inspiration, that stuff, it springs from life and nature. That's what a researcher should be doing. Take this telescope tube and stand, for instance. You can absolutely go look around various places in the tribe to find inspiration. The transmission mechanism of the lighthouse, the keel of a sailboat, the gears of windmills and water wheels, all sorts of mechanical contraptions. They are all ready-made teachers. When you have time, chat more with the master carpenters. Learn from their experience. Don't think you're hot stuff just because you're in a research institute. As the saying goes, among any 3 people there will surely be one who can teach me. Learn from others' strengths to make up for your weaknesses, draw inferences from one example, and apply what you've learned. That's true ability. Let me give you another tip. Making the telescope rotate in all directions is actually very simple. Go take a look at the bed-mounted crossbows on our tribe's ships. One joint that moves up and down, another that turns left and right. Isn't that all you need? Figure out the rest yourself. Yes, thank you for your guidance, Chief. Chief, so should we start working on it directly, or? The researcher was shedding tears of gratitude, thinking to himself, the Chief has given such clear pointers. If I still can't figure it out, I might as well pack my bags and get lost. No rush. You waved your hand. First, make a few samples of the military-grade monocular telescope. Then prepare for mass production. Use that 50mm Manto lens, a type of convex lens. The 40-power zoom model, iron-cased, sturdy, and durable. Once this job is done efficiently, then you can work on that half-meter aperture behemoth for me. The other requirements are as I just described. First, draw up the blueprints, then make a scaled model to verify it. When you think there are no problems, bring the model to me for inspection. Only after I give the go-ahead can you start building the actual thing, you instructed decisively. Yes. Chief, I understand. Then these telescopes. These few that I've taken a liking to will stay. Take the rest back for further research. Remember, keep the technology confidential. Don't go blabbing about it. Otherwise, you know the consequences. You selected a few well-made models and kept them, then sent the researcher away. Lenses. Research efforts on this stuff must be intensified. The uses for optical lenses are as vast as the sea. With a bit of development, a whole host of game-changing technologies could emerge. Monoculars, binoculars, eyeglasses for nearsightedness, farsightedness, reading glasses, industrial safety goggles, and even more advanced microscopes, perhaps even cameras. These are all part of a technology tree centered on lenses. In the future, the Han tribe must unlock every single one of these items. The telescope is just the first step in a long march. After the researcher left, you immediately had someone send the largest 600-power telescope to Shu Wu. The old man was currently the leading figure of the imperial astronomers. He'd spent his whole life looking at the stars. You reckoned he'd probably never even seen what a telescope looked like. Hopefully, when the old man received this grand gift, he'd be grinning from ear to ear. The next morning, in your office on the top floor of the Hanyang City Administration Building, that fellow Niu Wei entered. Without a second word, he dropped to his knees before you with a plop. He was crying up a storm, a real blubbering mess, snot bubbles almost forming. Niu Wei has failed the chief. It's all my fault for being too hasty and giving the game away, ruining the chief's grand, timeless plan. Boo-hoo-hoo. Chief, you are unparalleled in your benevolence and righteousness. Not only did you not cast me aside like a rat dropping, you even spent a great sum to ransom me back. I, Niu Wei, am moved to tears by your kindness. I'm willing to toil like an ox or horse for you for the rest of my life. I beg the chief to punish me. Chop off this worthless head of mine. You watched him with a deadpan expression, wondering internally whether to award him an Oscar. His acting skills were top-notch. Flattery poured out of him as if it cost nothing, and he just had to block every possible retort you could make. He even put an unparalleled benevolence and righteousness. Tall hat on you first. If you were to punish him now, wouldn't it make you seem petty and unjust? This scoundrel, he was so devious. Oh, so you do know you're guilty? You slowly rose from behind your desk and strolled to the front of it, your left hand resting stylishly on the hilt of the sword at your waist. This posture made Niu Wei tremble in fear. Holy crap, he thought. The Han tribe chief isn't planning to do the deed himself, is he? A white knife in, a red knife out? He was scared out of his wits. His head hit the floor with a thump, his rear end sticking high in the air. He kept shouting, "Guilty, guilty, this lowly one is guilty. I beg the chief for punishment." You didn't tell him to get up, shot him a disdainful glance, and continued your interrogation. How much did you reveal about the Han tribe's affairs to that Commander Shin? Niu Wei's heart skipped a beat. Not good, he thought. He's really going to settle old scores. But he didn't want to kick the bucket so ignominiously just like that. He quickly tried to defend himself. Reporting to the chief, this lowly one truly didn't say much. What I told them was all common knowledge, things out in the open, things like windmills, water wheels, seed drills, lighthouses. They'd already heard about these things from the envoy mission. This lowly one only briefly mentioned the daily lives of our Han tribe commoners and the rules for paying taxes. But these things are also written in that copy of the Han Li book of Han rights that was given to them. It really wasn't this lowly one being loose-lipped. Besides, when this lowly one left the Han tribe, the chief hadn't yet considered me one of your own. I hadn't even touched the fringes of those confidential matters. Even if I wanted to tell them something, I really had nothing to say. Niu Wei lay prostrate, looking as wronged as a mistreated young bride, his eyes fixed on your shadow cast on the ground, terrified that you might draw your sword and cut him down if a word was out of place. If he died just like that, what was, the point of him going through all that trouble to escape? He might as well have stayed rotting in jail. Oh, so you're saying this chief has wronged you? You suddenly walked up to him, looked down at the back of his smooth head and asked in an unfriendly tone. I wouldn't dare. This lowly one wouldn't dare question the chief. Niu Wei's heart tightened, and he cursed his bad luck inwardly. The chief was clearly looking for trouble. No matter how he answered, the chief could find fault. His heart was almost completely cold with despair now. He could only hope that you hadn't paid the price of 2 large ships to ransom him back, just to drag him here and execute him for sport. It's good that you know you're guilty. You had scared him sufficiently. Only then did you turn, walk back behind your desk and sit down. Get up. I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself through meritorious service. Kill him? Impossible. After all, he was exchanged for the trading rights of 2 ships. Besides, the Han tribe was expanding too rapidly right now and was short of manpower. Thank you, Chief, for sparing my life. Thank you, Chief, for giving this lowly one a chance to atone. As he spoke, he kowtowed, several times with loud thump-thump-thump sounds. Only then did he stand up shamelessly with a fawning expression. You glanced at him again, pulled out a not-too-large map from a nearby bookshelf, and spread it on the table. Take a look. Mark out any incomplete areas on this for me. If you dare miss a single thing, you can roll right back to your bamboo island and feed the fish. Niu Wei shivered inwardly while verbally repeating, I wouldn't dare, I wouldn't dare. He cautiously approached to look at the map. When he saw clearly what was drawn on it, his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. It was actually a complete map of Bamboo Island. Mountains and rivers, farmlands and villages, population distribution, mineral resources, coastal hydrography, even seasonal changes were marked with perfect clarity. The level of detail was hair-raising. Of course, this was his evaluation, as a native, of you migrant workers. A group of people without local household registration had actually managed to grasp the situation on Bamboo Island so thoroughly. It truly showed how formidable you were. However, for him, a native born and raised on Bamboo Island, there were still quite a few things that could be added to this map. For example, the spheres of influence of the various elder families. I wonder what kind of information the chief is looking for, Niu Wei asked tentatively, secretly glancing at you. Cultivated land, population distribution, spheres of influence, local specialty resources, transportation conditions. These are very important for future administrative divisions. They must be detailed and accurate. I imagine these things shouldn't be too difficult for you, a former elder of commerce, right? You asked, staring into his eyes, enunciating each word clearly. Of course, that's no problem. It's just, Chief Niu Wei has been imprisoned for nearly half a year. I still remember the old matters very clearly. But as for any changes in the past 6 months, this lowly one isn't too sure. Niu Wei thought for a moment and decided to state the unpleasantries up front, to avoid being dragged out and beheaded. Later, because this or that didn't match what he said, you don't need to worry about that. Just mark clearly everything you know. I will send people to verify everything one by one, you instructed again. In addition, all important strongholds, production and living facilities within 3 kilometers of Bamboo Island's coastline, and suitable landing spots for fleets, mark them all out for me. Yes, Chief. Then shall I work on it here right now? You shot the fellow another disdainful glance, pondered for a moment, then said, I will find someone to work with. You on creating new maps and a sand table model. You are to cooperate fully then. Also, compile what you know into a written report and submit it. As for your current assignment, you feigned contemplation, then revealed the arrangement you had already decided on. Go to the newly established Zhuifu County, under Ruyang Commandery, and serve as its county magistrate. Familiarize yourself with the county's administrative affairs as quickly as possible. While you're working on the map, don't neglect your official duties. I've given you the opportunity. What position you can climb to in the future will depend on your own abilities. What you lacked now were officials capable of taking charge independently. Niu Wei couldn't return to Bamboo Island anyway. It was better to keep him under your nose for a period of observation to see if he truly had what it took to be an official. Conveniently, Suifu County was also newly established, and it was primarily a university town. Matters within the schools were managed by dedicated principals. There weren't many actual commoners outside of it, only a few hundred households. If he couldn't even manage this small place well, you certainly wouldn't entrust him with a larger territory. Hearing your arrangements, Niu Wei was so thrilled he nearly performed a backflip on the spot. Although he was only a minor county magistrate for now, that wasn't important. What mattered was that not only had you not blamed him, but you had also made him an official. This was clearly a period of assessment. As long as he performed well, becoming a commandery governor, or even holding a higher position in the future wasn't out of the question. He, Niu Wei, certainly didn't consider himself a fool. After profusely thanking you for this grace of giving him a new lease on life, Niu Wei was finally sent on his way. You silently sat down on the nearby guest sofa, picked up your teacup, took a sip, and began to ponder the Han tribe's grand strategy for future development. That very afternoon, when the sun was at its most scorching, you had just finished a bowl of refreshingly cold tossed noodles at home and were about to take a nap in a room cooled with ice blocks when the maidservant outside came in to announce that a message delivered by Fast Eagle had just arrived. You quickly took the letter, somewhat surprised that it was actually from that young fellow, Yu Yi. Could it be that the temporary camp in the north was experiencing more trouble? However, after a quick scan of the contents, you realized it was Yu Yi's routine report on recent work. But one sentence which he had casually glossed over successfully caught your attention. On the northwestern ice plains, there is a black lake that never thaws, reeks to high heaven, and people can stand on its surface. That dark, viscous asphalt lake, you were definitely interested in it. This stuff was practically a strategic-level treasure. You immediately wrote a reply to Yu Ye, telling him to swiftly investigate every nook and cranny around the asphalt lake. Was transportation convenient? Was the ore easy to transport? What was the surrounding climate like? Could the land support crops or livestock? Was there enough fresh water? Could people settle there long-term? All these things needed to, be figured out. After all, to exploit the asphalt lake, you couldn't do it without sufficient manpower. And with more people, providing for their basic needs would become a major issue. Of course, the Han tribe was resourceful and well-established. It wasn't impossible to transport grain from other places, but that would make the mining costs absurdly high, which wouldn't be worthwhile. However, this matter couldn't be rushed. Such a large undertaking, such a vast area to survey, it definitely couldn't be done in 10 days or half a month. So, you'd have to wait. Besides, the Han tribe was, currently overextended, with construction projects everywhere. Even if you had detailed information and plans right now, you probably wouldn't have the spare capacity to start exploitation. Whenever you faced such a shortage of people, you couldn't help but think of the Tang tribe and the Shin tribe. If only these two populous tribes could be put to use immediately, how wonderful that would be. Unfortunately, that was pure daydreaming. Han tribe, Shingang Commandery. Before the year's end, with the rise of the Han tribe's coking plant and Shingang Commandery, dozens of blast furnaces spewed molten steel day and night. The Han tribe's steel production once reached an awkward situation of, good grief, we've smelted too much, we can't use it all. Later, when you developed cannons and cannonballs, a portion of the steel was finally consumed, easing the inventory pressure. But with the successful delivery of those 200 cannons, steel production once again far surpassed consumption. However, this situation, which felt like a joke played by fate, saw a bit of a turnaround with the arrival of spring. The Han tribe had established many new commanderies and counties this year. The Honghu 3 commanderies on the grasslands, Tuohai Commandery by the sea, Nanjiang Commandery to the south, and new county towns in Ruyang Commandery and Dongshin Commandery. As construction began in these places one after another, Coupled with the influx of many new recruits and natural population growth, the Han tribe's demand for iron goods also rose accordingly. Pots, bowls, pans, hoes, sickles, none could do without iron. This greatly alleviated the pressure on steel inventory, finally allowing the tribe's steel industry to roughly break even. But this was ultimately not a long-term solution. Once these newly established commanderies and counties stabilized, their demand for ironware would naturally cool down. To maintain the vigorous vitality of the Han tribe's steelmaking industry, you felt it necessary to find another industry that could consume steel in large quantities. Actually, you already had a clear idea: bicycles and tricycles. For both types of vehicles, the main components were made of steel. If they could be successfully popularized, the Han tribe's steel production would definitely be fully consumed by them. Unfortunately, limited by the current technical difficulty of purely handmade production and the frighteningly high labor costs, rapidly popularizing these items was no different from daydreaming. So, for now, you had to find another way. You racked your brains for a long time and finally had to decide to restart the long-dormant steam engine project. Once you had the tremendous power provided by this device, things like metalworking machine tools would be no issue, and steam trains could also transform from blueprints into reality. Moreover, due to the experience gained from previously developing cannons, the Han tribe already had a certain foundation in boring machine technology. This meant that the most important component of the steam engine, the high-pressure cylinder, also had a basis for development. You prepared to start experimenting. Now, so what if it wasn't successful at first? Take it slow, every little bit adds up. Simultaneously, you had already planned the route for the Han tribe's first railway line in your mind. From Weishan Commandery to Xingang Commandery, a total distance of nearly 80 kilometers. This route was currently the vital artery of the Han tribe's land transportation. Every day, hundreds, even thousands of horse-drawn carts carrying coke, grain, cloth, and various iron products bustled back and forth on this road. The rumbling of wheels and the clatter of hooves had become the busiest scenic route in the tribe. If a railway could be built here, how much manpower, animal power, and material resources would that save the Han tribe? Although the locomotive was still nowhere in sight, the rails could be laid first. If there was no locomotive to pull, we could use horses. In short, for this type of heavy transport line, railed transport was definitely much more efficient than those potholed dirt roads. As for the rail gauge, although you weren't a professional, you knew a thing or two. After all, you had studied the history of warfare in your previous life. During World War I and World War II, so many battles revolved around railways. You had analyzed quite a few battle case studies, though. Of course, the focus wasn't on analyzing the railways themselves. Regarding rails, they could be roughly divided into two stages. The first stage was when trains had just been invented, and railways were built by private owners. At that time, trains were mostly used for hauling ore from mines, and were built quite crudely. Most used cast iron rails laid directly on the ground, without even sleepers or ballast, and the gauge was predominantly narrow. By the second stage, railways had become public transportation tools mainly for transporting goods and passengers. To pursue the comfort of passenger trains, sleepers, and ballast gradually appeared on the railways, and various gauge specifications such as standard gauge and broad gauge also emerged. Specifically concerning the range of gauges, they could also be roughly divided into three types: narrow gauge railways, standard gauge railways, and broad gauge railways. Narrow gauge generally referred to railways where the distance between the two rails was between 60 centimeters and 100 centimeters. This slender type of railway mostly evolved from mine carts because it was originally used specifically for hauling ore in mines. Later, however, because this narrow gauge railway was easy to lay and not very picky about terrain, it also frequently appeared on battlefields. During World War I and World War II, Western countries laid these small train lines temporarily to rush supplies and troops on the battlefield. They could even lay tracks while moving, shifting positions at any time. That was its advantage. Secondly, there was the second stage of rail transport development, mainly for freight and passenger trains. For trains built for these two purposes, the smallest gauge was the standard gauge, about 1.55 meters. Trains of this gauge were very common for both passenger and freight transport and have been used into modern society without being phased out. It is said that the origin of this figure was simply because the axle distance of Western horse-drawn carriages at the time, especially those pulled by two horses, was this width, 1.55 meters. This width was just enough to accommodate two horses running side by side, and was also the most common mode of transport in the West at the time. So it was somewhat muddle-headedly established as the standard gauge. The appearance of broad-gauge railways was mostly for relatively rare super-heavy freight-dedicated lines. Passenger transport generally didn't use them. The range of this, broad gauge, meaning the distance between the two rails, was generally between 1.8 and 2.4 meters, specifically used for transporting heavy or bulky goods. To put it exaggeratedly, a train could carry a whole column of tanks and still manage it. The Han tribe's current situation most urgently needed narrow gauge and standard gauge rail transport. The narrow gauge wouldn't be used for carrying people or goods, but would be very suitable for both coal mines and iron mines. The standard gauge, the width of two horses, was more suitable for carrying passengers and freight. Both types of railways had their own uses, and there was no inherent superiority of one over the other. With these data as references and bases, the subsequent development of steam locomotives would have clear goals, avoiding many unnecessary detours. Thinking of this, you immediately made the call, formulating a two-pronged approach development plan for steam engines and railways. Since the decision was made, a discussion and mobilization meeting was essential. After you proposed the overall plan, you gave them free rein to develop it. Of course, you still had to do the summary. You cleared your throat and continued, "I've already mentioned why we aren't choosing other fuels for power. The reason is simple. Our current machining capabilities are still lacking. Steam engines have a simple structure and high fault tolerance. Even if they're made a bit crudely, they can still be made to work. Moreover, their operating cost is the lowest. Others, whether acetylene, tung oil, alcohol, or gunpowder, are not the most ideal fuels. Those fuels that require fine processing are too expensive. Conversely, coal is abundant, can be used as soon as it's dug up, and as long as it can boil water, that's all there is to it." The researchers below all nodded like chicks pecking at grain, finally gaining a more intuitive understanding of your ideas. Actions speak louder than words. You waved your hand grandly. "I've already had the glass workshop create a transparent steam engine model to help everyone understand its principles more intuitively. Now, who wants to come up and demonstrate it for everyone?" As soon as you finished speaking, there was a whoosh from below, and hands shot up everywhere like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. It seemed you had successfully ignited the enthusiasm of this group of tech geeks. You yourself weren't afraid of much, only that this group under you wouldn't be enthusiastic about steam engines. But now, the atmosphere in the room was electric. You casually picked a lucky individual and asked him to come up to operate it. The man bowed respectfully to you, addressing you as Chief, then cupped his hands in greeting to his colleagues below the stage, before starting to carefully examine the novel contraption before him. This steam engine model you had people make wasn't a complete large machine, but an exquisite wooden frame. A flywheel was mounted on the frame, with a piston and connecting rod in front, and a cylinder, blown from transparent glass. In front of the cylinder was a small glass bottle containing water, acting as the boiler, connected to the cylinder by a translucent rubber tube. As for the heating method, an alcohol lamp was used for external heating. This was a standard tool. In the laboratory, the Han tribe lacked neither glass nor alcohol, so you simply took the opportunity to make them this time. The researcher who came on stage began to operate under your direction. He first added half a bottle of water to the flask, then connected it to the cylinder, stabilized the frame, lit the alcohol lamp, adjusted the flame height, and moved the alcohol lamp under the flask. The water temperature began to rise slowly, and some hot vapor immediately blurred the empty inner wall of the flask. The people below all craned their necks like a flock of baby birds crying out to be fed, staring intently at the platform. "You can all come closer to see, but please be quiet and don't crowd too much," you said with a smile, deliberately, letting them get closer so everyone could see clearly. Hearing this, the crowd was overjoyed. They quickly and quietly stood up, and with a rustle surrounded the platform, packing it so tightly there wasn't an inch to spare. The flask was small, and the half bottle of water inside was quickly heated, beginning to slowly emit many tiny bubbles, though it wasn't quite boiling yet. One impatient person couldn't help but ask, "Chief, is the startup speed of this machine a bit slow? It feels even more sluggish than a windmill or water wheel." "Slow? Slow doesn't matter." You explained with a smile. "If you can start it in the time it takes to boil water, and then let it chug away all day, that startup time is basically negligible. Besides, its fuel consumption, oh no, coal consumption isn't large either, so it won't waste much energy." Just as you finished speaking, the water in the flask began to bubble vigorously. Inside the small flask, hot water churned and bubbled, and a large amount of steam began desperately seeking an escape route. However, the flask was sealed tightly, and the steam had nowhere to go. In the end, it could only be forced, aggrieved, through the translucent yellow rubber tube and into the transparent glass cylinder. This was a model of a reciprocating steam engine. The intake port on top of the cylinder was connected to the piston and connecting rod, with a valve mechanism controlling the intake passage and also connected to an exhaust port. However, as a large amount of steam rushed in, the white, hot vapor, instead of pushing the piston, escaped directly through the exhaust port. The flywheel remained completely still. The scene became exceedingly awkward. "Chief, what should we do next?" The researcher operating on stage looked at the stifling scene before him and broke the silence. You pondered for a moment, thinking, does this thing also need a kickstart like a single-cylinder diesel tractor, giving the flywheel some initial momentum with a crank handle? So you said, pinch the rubber tube at the exhaust port shut to increase the pressure inside the cylinder, then use your other hand to spin the flywheel and give it some initial inertia. The researcher nimbly did as you said. He pinched the exhaust tube shut, and the steam pressure inside the cylinder immediately soared. The accumulating steam, with no outlet, had nowhere else to go, and finally had no choice but to desperately push towards the only movable part, the piston. "It's working." Everyone around them lit up. The operator didn't dare delay and quickly gave the flywheel a sharp spin with his other hand. The next moment, under the combined force of the steam and the connecting rod, the flywheel began to whir and spin. "Quick, release the exhaust tube," you hurriedly reminded him. Once the operator released the exhaust tube, the flywheel, propelled back and forth by the steam, spun faster and faster, causing the small wheel on top to also rotate rapidly with a whoosh, 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 while you were busy tinkering with machinery in the Han tribe, having a grand time. On the other side, the Envoy mission's currency promotion on Bamboo Island was also in full swing, bustling like a market fair. Ship after ship of copper coins and iron ingots were transported to the Envoy mission's encampment as if they were free, and then immediately distributed to the various branches across the island. Of course, calling them branches was a bit of an overstatement. After all, those stubborn old codgers in the Shin tribe hadn't yet agreed to let the Han tribe build freely outside the Envoy mission's encampment. So those so-called branches, or rather currency exchange points, were more like temporary open-air markets. That fellow Shoya submitted an application report, discussed it with Da Shu from Tuohai Commandery, and Da Shu then pulled together a group of people from Tuohai Commandery to form several small merchant caravans. Then, these caravans, dispatched by the Envoy mission, spread out to every corner of Bamboo Island, engaging in the metal trade business, to put it bluntly, promoting the Han tribe's copper coins. Shu Ya's Envoy mission, from the time they first landed on the island to the successive reinforcements, totaled only about 300 or 400 people. If they were only managing the trivial matters within the encampment, it would have been barely enough. But if they wanted to promote the currency throughout the entire Bamboo Island, this small number of people, when spread out, wouldn't even make a ripple. Clearly, they had to dispatch more personnel from the Han tribe. But this was only the superficial appearance. In reality, this currency promotion activity had long since escalated into a multi-departmental joint sweep, holding the maps of Bamboo Island's population, factions, and resource distribution provided by that fellow Niu Wei. The envoy mission took the lead under the guise of promoting currency. Then agents from Yuji's Jianwu Wei, Imperial Guards, disguised themselves as caravan leaders. Shu Da's fleet was responsible for waterway transport and escort. The Huben Wei, Tiger Knight's soldiers under Shuitu, served as the backbone of the caravans, responsible for security. As for those captured herdsman warriors, they could only do menial tasks like serving tea, pouring water, and carrying things. Thus, this mighty joint investigation team, under the banner of doing business, turned the entire Bamboo Island upside down. This task, in fact, turned out to be much easier and more convenient than imagined. The true purpose of this currency promotion was to use ironware and copper coins to completely scrape clean all the copper items from the hands of the Bamboo Island commoners. Therefore, the demand for copper coins wasn't actually that large. Conversely, the consumption of ironware was quite astonishing. But precisely because of this, it better concealed the Han tribe's reconnaissance operations. The operational procedure was roughly as follows. First, the fleet would escort a batch of small, single-masted oared boats, sailing grandly to the envoy mission's encampment on Bamboo Island. Then, the fleet would cruise around Bamboo Island in the coastal waters, patrolling and reconnoitering. Those single-masted sailboats became the main mode of transport for the caravans, responsible for carrying people and goods to every nook and cranny. Because the Jin tribe, like the Han tribe, was an agricultural civilization, as long as the caravans followed the main rivers, they could basically cover most of the inhabited areas of Bamboo Island. Upon arriving at a location, several of these small boats would form a temporary base, setting up camp locally. Then, the caravans would go to the Shin tribe's villages and market towns to vigorously publicize their trade, exchanging ironware for copperware. When enough copperware was exchanged, it could be converted into clinking copper coins. If they didn't want money, it was no problem either. They could exchange various daily necessities from the caravans at market price. This method of trading for the local natives who had never seen much of the world was like a pie falling from the sky, incredibly attractive. And what the local natives wanted to exchange for most were mostly tools like knives or agricultural implements. As for cookware like pots and pans, they generally didn't use metal ones. Most Shin tribe commoners still used pottery jars and earthenware pots for cooking, and natural containers like bamboo tubes for eating and drinking. Therefore, whenever a Han tribe caravan arrived, the local commoners would, like attending a market fair, joyfully bring out the copperware they had accumulated at home to exchange for various treasures, especially important production tools like knives and agricultural implements, which were highly sought-after goods. Iron items were much lighter than copper ones, and also sharper and more durable. It was like upgrading from a bird gun to a cannon. They had no reason not to exchange. Moreover, the Han tribe exchanged by weight, and the prices of different iron items varied relative to copper, but overall, iron was much cheaper than copper. Generally speaking, knives such as sickles, choppers, kitchen knives, and axes were basically the same price as copper. Slightly cheaper were agricultural tools, which were generally a tier lower in price than knives. Iron pots and iron spoons, as cookware, were in the cheapest tier, and thus quite popular locally. After all, who wouldn't want to use shiny iron pots for stir-frying? The Han tribe, on their end, could use the transaction volume of these items to secretly gather statistics on the actual situation of Bamboo Island, truly killing two birds with one stone. For example, the number of iron pots sold could basically be used as an estimate for the local household units. Because under normal circumstances, one pot per family was pretty much enough. A family couldn't eat from a communal pot every meal, could they? And the number of agricultural tools sold could be used to estimate the local adult labor force. For instance, if a family bought 3 sickles, it meant that the family had at least 3 people capable of working in the fields. By the same token, since these 3 people could do farm work, they could also take up arms and go to war, so these also had to be estimated as the Shin tribe's potential combat strength. Copper coins? What are copper coins? Are they also your Han tribe's hoes and sickles? An old man who came to exchange for a sickle asked, holding the newly acquired copper coins with a bewildered expression. Wen Shi's mouth twitched. He suppressed the urge to roll his eyes, put on a professional fake smile, and pointed to a small basket on the table, saying, "Old sir, these shiny little copper pieces are the money of our Han tribe. Although they can't be used as tools, nor can they be smashed for fun, they can be used to buy things. Any goods from the Han tribe can be exchanged for them. Of course, you need to have enough. Can't eat it, can't drink it, can't use it as a tool. Then what use is it to me?" The old man was unhappy. "Since you say this money can be exchanged for things, why don't you just give me the things directly? I don't want this useless money." The old man picked up a copper coin and turned it over and over in his hand. The thing was quite exquisitely made, with flowers carved on one side and a human head on the other, along with a dense cluster of small characters. Unfortunately, he didn't know many characters. He just noticed that one of the characters looked quite similar to the one on the flag hanging on the ship, guessing it was probably the Han tribe's character for Han. But this thing, 1, couldn't fill his stomach, 2, couldn't quench his thirst, 3, couldn't be used for work. No matter how good-looking it was a useless trinket in his hands. So with a clink, he threw the copper coin back into the basket and asked Wen Shi to exchange it for tangible goods. Being rejected on the first attempt at promotion, Wen Shi wasn't anxious. After all beginnings are difficult. He still said with a smile, all right, old sir, I'll exchange them for goods for you. But look, there's such a long queue behind you waiting to sell copper for iron. How about I give you change with these copper coins first, and then have someone take you to see our Han tribe's other good things? You can take your time to look and pick, see what you can exchange for. The old man originally wanted to pay and receive goods on the spot, settling the transaction immediately, but looking at the dense crowd behind him, and then at the scorching sun overhead, which was almost baking people into dried salted fish, he felt embarrassed to haggle further, and nodded in agreement. However, the old man wasn't stupid. Fearing being cheated by these outsiders after receiving the copper coins Wen Shi gave him as change, he immediately pestered the Han tribe people, insisting on exchanging for goods right away. The caravan staff naturally agreed readily and happily took the old man to choose other goods. "Old sir, take your time, pick whatever you like. All our goods are displayed here. If there's anything you want, just tell me. I'll tell you the price and you can use the copper coins in your hand to exchange for it." A Hu Ben Wei squad leader in plain clothes greeted him as warmly, as if he were a relative. All right, let me take a look first, the old man replied and began to wander around the stalls. Because they were transported by boat, the goods brought by the caravan this time were incredibly comprehensive. Large items included pots, bowls, pans, scissors, and cloth. Small items included needles, thread, shoe soles, and paper patterns. Expensive items even included the legendary carbide lamps, weighing scales, and beautifully printed calendars. Cheap items included inconspicuous little things like chopsticks and wooden spoons. The old man looked around, his eyes almost blurring from the selection, and he couldn't decide what he actually needed. So he called over his daughter-in-law and little grandson to help him decide what the family was lacking. "How much are these needles?" The old man's daughter-in-law asked, holding her child's hand and squatting in front of a stall. Steel needles. The short ones are 1 wen, a basic monetary unit, each. The long ones are 2 wen each. We also have them in boxes, 10 per ye. Box. How many do you want? The caravan attendant sat cross-legged on a mat at the stall, leisurely doing business. You Han tribe people don't come often, so let's buy a few more. Give me 5 short ones and 5 long ones, the woman calculated. But how much money do I give you for this? How do you calculate this? She was a bit confused. 5 short ones, at 1 wen each. That's 5 wen. 5 long ones. At 2 wen each, that's 1 jiao, a larger monetary unit, 10 wen. So you just need to give me 1 jiao and 5 wen in total. The woman turned around and looked at her father-in-law, who was clutching the money, signaling him to pay. As it turned out, the old man also had a completely baffled expression, looking at the handful of colorful copper coins of various sizes, unable to distinguish which was which. Young man, this old man can't read. How exactly do I exchange these things? Ha 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 ha. Don't worry, old sir. I'll teach you to recognize this money. The attendant chuckled. Our Han tribe's coins are very easy to recognize. Even if you can't read, you can tell which is which. Look, this one with a stalk of grain on the front, and it's the lightest and thinnest. That's 1 wen. This one with a person wearing a conical hat working in the field. That's 2 wen. This one with an ox pulling a plow, that's 5 wen. The next size up is called a jiao. This comes in 2 colors. The one with a horse printed on. It is 1 jiao. The one with a sheep is 2 jiao. The one with an eagle is 5 jiao. What your daughter-in-law bought costs a total of 1 jiao and 5 wen, so you just need to give me one with a horse on it, and one with an ox pulling a plow, the attendant said, pointing to the patterns on the copper coins and patiently explaining to them. I know it. I know it. Grandpa, let me help you find them. The little grandson beside them immediately got excited upon hearing this. Children love to play, and they especially love good-looking toys. These copper coins were exquisitely made and had various patterns on them, indeed making them very appealing to children. The 5 or 6-year-old child with sharp eyes and quick hands immediately picked out the coins with patterns of a plowing ox and a horse from the handful of copper coins in the old man's hand. Then he looked at his grandfather with a grin, his little expression almost screaming, "Praise me! Praise me!" The old man naturally wouldn't dampen his grandson's enthusiasm. He quickly praised him a couple of times, and then handed the money to the caravan attendant. The attendant took the money, deftly took out a small bamboo tube with a stopper, put all 10 needles the woman wanted into it, and then began to introduce the prices of goods to the other onlookers. As the copper-iron exchange on the other side heated up, a large number of commoners who had received copper coins as change also gathered around the general goods stalls, chattering and asking the caravan attendants about the prices of various goods. Many transactions were completed one after another. The speed at which the local indigenous people accepted the currency was astonishing. One had to admire your foresight when designing these patterns and the decimal system back then. When the Han tribe initially promoted its currency, it took into account that most commoners were illiterate and couldn't distinguish currency denominations. That's why you had a flash of inspiration and came up with the method of using patterns instead of characters. As long as one could understand what was drawn on it, one could find the corresponding denomination. Simple, crude, and remarkably effective. And that decimal currency system was simply a godsend for the illiterate commoners whose arithmetic skills weren't great. They could use their 10 fingers as an abacus, making calculations convenient and quick, fair to young and old alike. Even among the Han tribe's own people, let alone when the currency was first introduced. Even now, many still relied on the patterns on the coins to identify their denominations. Just then, a man among the crowd of shoppers suddenly asked loudly, "Han envoy, I want to buy this iron pot, but I don't have enough money. What should I do?" "How much are you short?" the attendant selling goods asked without looking up. "Short, by your reckoning, I'm still short 2 jiao. What can I do about this?" the man asked with a worried expression. He had already bought everything else he needed, and the money in his hand was mostly spent. But he still had some loose change left, and he didn't want to just carry it. Around, feeling uneasy. Seeing the caravan attendants outside the shed using an iron pot to cook over a fire, the aroma wafting through the air, he was suddenly tempted to use his remaining money to buy one and try it out. Unfortunately, the iron pot was not cheap, and he was just a little short of money.